You'll have to excuse me if everything starts to wobble and ring, and I've everything on silent. My phone, my watch, everything has been going all day long, in actual fact, since very early this morning, because, of course, we have really big breaking news. Some might say at long last.
Yeah.
But look, one way or another, it's significant. And Sean McGovern was woken in the early hours of the morning in his bed, no doubt, in Dubai, the Emirates, and he was arrested on foot of a warrant, an Interpol red notice that has been out there for him since those sanctions. That was April 2022, those sanctions. So that is how long, like that. At the announcement of those sanctions against the Kinahan organisation, which was a huge moment, it was also sort of almost lost in the ether that McGovern was wanted for the murder of Noel Duck Egg Kirwan.
Yeah, which is a rare thing for guards to say, I suppose, is to say somebody is wanted. In order for there to be a red notice or an Interpol warrant, they have to already be charged. They can't issue an Interpol red notice for somebody who is a suspect. So he had already been charged, and it may have even been a couple of months before. So that was, at that point then we knew that Sean McGovern was wanted in connection with the murder of Duck Egg Kirwan. We also knew that they knew more or less where he was living, or at least where he had been spending his time. And I think when those sanctions were announced, certainly I thought he's bound to be picked up.
I thought he was going to be picked up almost immediately because, you know, a wanted thing. The Emirates have always been a bit tricky, and we'll get on to who has been sent back where and all the rest of it from there. But they always want everybody, every jurisdiction to have their ducks in a row. Yeah. And they ultimately want somebody to be charged with a crime.
Yeah.
Or to be on the run or whatever. If it's any way woolly about the deportation, it seems to be very difficult, very antiquated to get around, because, of course, nowhere in Europe has an extradition treaty, a simple extradition treaty with the United Arab Emirates, because our laws are simply too different for that to exist.
Exactly. So, I mean, for example, a charge to do with, say, facilitating organised crime, an equivalent charge may not exist in Dubai. So therefore, the extradition can be complex, because the argument will be made that, well, I shouldn't be extradited for a crime that doesn't exist in Dubai. But murder is a crime in all jurisdictions. I mean, there isn't a country in the world that won't have a murder charge. So that's why it seemed that the extradition of Sean McGovern would be really, really straightforward, where you can imagine an extradition regarding sort of money laundering or directing criminal organisation, which may be brought against Daniel Kinahan, might be more complex. So it was amazing, really, to see Sean McGovern not being picked up. And, you know, it became a source of many rumours and, you know, many discussions. But the day has come. The justice system and the government, the state's involvement in pursuing that justice has ground down whatever bureaucracy, whatever complications have existed when it comes to McGovern, and he's now in custody.
Now he is, but of course he will have an ability to appeal. He may or he may not actually have that ability to appeal. Nothing is quite clear. He could be on a plane home within 24 hours, or he could have this protracted legal case over in the Emirates where he does appeal, if he's allowed to do that.
Yeah, because we've seen both things happen. We certainly saw with Rafael Imperiale, another leading member of the super cartel. They seem to have, the Italian government seems to have had to jump through incredible hoops to get him back. However, in recent times, we've done a podcast about Angelo Pandelli, the Australian biker gang boss, who they seem to have just booted out of the country without any...
like him, didn't it?
No, I don't know. So, you know, the law is just not the same over there.
So look, let's go back to who Sean McGovern is and why he's in Dubai in the first place, because we know quite a lot about him, obviously. So McGovern was one of the original members of those sort of Crumlin Drimna criminals who sort of came of age as John Gilligan's gang imploded following the murder of Veronica Guerin. They were young street dealers for Gilligan. They found themselves at 16 or 17 looking into this vacuum that they felt they could fill, because the likes of Brian Rattick and Declan Gavin had been over and back to Amsterdam with Gilligan. They'd met the suppliers. They realised that the boss was gone, and they had a ambition and drive to up themselves in the ranks before really they learned the ropes. Like it's like any sort of a preemptive, somebody in any business getting really into the top seat too quickly. They lose a little bit of learning.
Yeah. I mean, I think Sean McGovern was not one of those initial core gang members where we had the Burns and Graham Whelan, the Whig, people like that. McGovern is a couple of years younger, but he was always associated with the sort of the Byrne crew, that sort of slightly younger generation who were carrying out the orders for the Byrne side. I remember the first mention of his name was back in the Bebo days. They put up a list of the young Fat Freddy guys, they were calling them. People like Paul Gray, who we went on to write a lot about, who became a significant criminal figure in his own right. But they were the sort of slightly younger generation, and Sean McGovern was just another name at that stage.
He was a schoolboy friend of the Burns in particular, and he was from very early on, from his school days, going out with a girl called Anita Freeman.
Yeah.
And Anita Freeman actually witnessed that the murder of Declan Gavin by Brian Rattigan, which he later was, a murder conviction was overturned and it was a manslaughter conviction that he ended up with on that. But nonetheless, this sort of row had instilled between the grouping. It was a power play really between Declan Gavin, I think, and Brian Rattigan. And Rattigan saw an opportunity one night to go up and he murdered Declan Gavin in the Abracababra Chipper in Crumlin. And a number of people were there that night who saw things. And Anita Freeman was one of those. She witnessed it and she was going out then with Sean McGovern. So they were very key and very significant and in that inner circle.
They were in that Byrne inner circle. I mean, David Byrne was also there that night. David Byrne, Liam Byrne's brother, who would be killed in the Regency. So Sean McGovern, as the Byrne organisation rose, because at that stage the Byrnes were just one of a grouping, even though they were certainly significant players. But as the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud played out, and other people ended up in prison, and other people ended up fleeing the country, the Byrnes had an incredible rise, I suppose, as they became more and more tied in with the Kinahan organisation. And I mean, ultimately it was been described in cab cases how the Byrne organised crime group became the Kinahan franchise, the Irish Kinahan franchise. And Sean McGovern at that point was absolutely tied in with Liam Byrne.
And at that point, I suppose, just to date things, we're talking about the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud playing out throughout the noughties, 2000 really to 2010. By 2010, McGovern is very significantly placed within the Byrne organised crime group, which are the Dublin wing of the Kinahan organisation. And they're working so closely with Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, who's due to be sentenced in the next couple of weeks. He's based in Birmingham. He is related to the Byrnes and he is almost becoming the English wing of the Kinahan organised crime group, who are by 2010 situated in Spain. We'd need a map on the back here as we speak about to keep up on this. But just to get everybody placed, that's where McGovern is by 2010 and onwards from then. He is very, very close with Liam Byrne. He's in business with him. They own a business called LS Active Cars, which is located in Crumlin. It would subsequently emerge that it was literally sort of a money laundering wing for all this drugs they were running in and out of the country. They were using cars as currency to pay people. They were working with Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, who also had a car company in the UK. And they were making a lot of money. But McGovern was family to the Byrnes. He was in and out of that house. Sadie and Jaws, the late Jaws Byrne, were almost like parents to him. Yeah. He purchased a house and lived in a house which was in what was like their stronghold. There was Raleigh Square where the Byrne parents, Sadie and Jaws Byrne, lived. Liam Byrne had a house behind them. And there was other properties in that area that had been bought up by the organisation. Across the road from there, David Byrne lived with his partner and children. And just on Kildare Road, was it?
Yeah.
Sean McGovern lived with Anita Freeman. And they were like family.
They were like family.
There was a blood bond there that you wouldn't have thought could or would be broken. And yet...
And yet. So, I mean, I think you see at that stage in around the 2010s, you see that McGovern is always with the Byrnes, but is always, so we have pictures of him. For example, you can see his prominence in those organisations. We have a picture of Jaws Byrne at a boxing match beside Daniel Kinahan, and in the row and Liam Byrne, and in the row, literally the row behind him, in the sort of hierarchy of who's important, is sitting Sean McGovern. So he's risen. As I said, if you go back to the Bebo days, there's a list of all these guys, and Sean McGovern is one of them. But by the 2010s, he's way up ahead of all of those guys.
But I think McGovern, and this is part of why he is where he is now, had a business brain and was in the background. And you mentioned Ian Mad Dog Maloney, and that a lot of these guys, their strength, their qualities are for their violence, their volatile nature, their ability to be the sort of dogs of war, to go out there to cause fear, to collect debts. Whereas Sean McGovern showed a bit of a business prowess. And there was a sneakiness to him, I always thought. He was sort of always skulking along with Liam Byrne. He was in the business. And you talk about 2010, and that was the first attempt to take down the Kinahan organisation, an abject failure in Spain under Operation Shovel. They grew bigger and larger and more powerful than ever in the aftermath of that. But back in Ireland, you would have looked on McGovern as being this loyal servant to the Byrnes and to Bomber Kavanagh. But as the feud starts, as David Byrne is shot dead, and as the Kavanagh, Byrne, Kinahan organisations come together with murder on their mind to avenge that killing and the attempted murder of Daniel Kinahan at the Regency, McGovern all of a sudden becomes a significant friend and associate of Daniel Kinahan.
He does. And, although the Byrne and the Byrne organisation, the Kinahan Cartel, became a sort of one operation, they were still quite distinct in terms of the roles that they had, and Liam Byrne wouldn't have been answering to Daniel Kinahan about everything that he did. But McGovern certainly has went from being a Byrne man to a Kinahan man somewhere along the line. And you talk back to Operation Shovel 2010, and as part of Operation Shovel, you have this breakdown of the Kinahan organisation that the Spanish police had drawn up, and you have figures like Gary Hutcher mentioned, figures like Freddie Thompson. There's no mention of Sean McGovern at that point, but by the time the feud kicks off in earnest 6 years later, McGovern has moved up, I suppose. He's been poached, if you want. He's gone from, he's changed teams really to the Kinahan.
Well, of course, when that feud broke out, the Byrne and the Kinahan organisations brought all their powers together. Daniel Kinahan went back firstly to Spain and then moved to Dubai and never came back here again. So he directed operations from afar, while I think Bomber Kavanagh the Byrnes took on the dirty work on the streets. And what I certainly do know and did know at the time of that, from February 2016, McGovern is a way more significant character than we had ever given him credit for, because he's behind the scenes, he's gathering the intel. He's in a position to pay for whatever intel he's getting. He's the one that is deciding who lives and who dies. He's drawing up the lists for Daniel Kinahan. And I think that is what brings them very close together. Murder, really. In December of 2016, Noel Duck Egg Kirwan is murdered, and Kirwan is an innocent man. He has appeared, he's a friend of Jerry the Monk Hutch's, he's appeared at his side at Eddie Hutch's funeral. Eddie Hutch, of course, is killed in the days after the Regency Hotel, and he appears at his side and is photographed at his side and is seen at his side. And he's a long-term associate and friend of Jerry the Monk Hutch, a Dubliner, and he is killed on his doorstep in December 2016, the end of a spree of murders, and one that was particularly shocking because the motivation seemed to be purely because he had stood beside the monk at this funeral. And around that time, 2016, Sean McGovern, who's been very actively, certainly, investigated for a lot of what's gone on since the Regency, he ups and leaves and heads to Dubai. In the aftermath of that murder. And he never returns here again.
No.
He gets wind that he has somehow been caught up in this murder investigation. He's worried that he's going to be arrested. And he gets sanctuary to Dubai. And in order to do that, to go there and to get the sanctuary that has lasted up until today, early hours of this morning, he needed the nod from Daniel Kinahan.
Yeah.
Because you just didn't go to Dubai.
No.
Very few people were given the red carpet there, and he was.
Yes, and he even ended up living in an apartment that Daniel Kinahan had lived in himself in Dubai. So he was taken in, and at that time, it kind of, the tensions between the Burns organised group and the Kinahans had really started to escalate as well. What had been a harmonious relationship where they'd work together and exchange whatever they needed to exchange, that had started to break down. Sean McGovern had been Liam Burns' like absolute closest lieutenant, and at some point he seems to have, as the 2017, 2018, the relationship with Liam Byrne and Daniel Kinahan was said to have become really, really bad and toxic. And at that point, McGovern had thrown his cards in with Daniel Kinahan 100%.
And in Dubai, he is constantly at his side, and he is this very, very sort of clever, manipulative, I think, character, Sean McGovern, because Daniel Kinahan doesn't really take advice from many. He's somebody who surrounds himself with yes men.
Yeah.
But McGovern, he always sought advice from. McGovern was right in his inner circle, but he wasn't one of the nodding dogs.
Yeah.
He was somebody who was part of the Kinahan organisation at that point in time. As it continued to grow in Dubai,
Yeah.
you know, shipping vast amounts of cocaine around the world and ordering murder and whatnot from, you know, the luxury properties that we have seen they were buying up over there.
And it was said about McGovern that Daniel Kinahan would talk to McGovern, and McGovern would then talk to the people, and that would give, like the old mafia guys in the US, they'd only talk to two people. The Don would. He'd only talk to his brother and somebody else, for example, and then they'd circulate the orders. So he never gave any order except for to one person that he could trust the most, and that was always said about McGovern, that Daniel spoke to him, and then when Sean McGovern spoke to you, you knew where it was coming from. Daniel wouldn't say it, have to say it himself. I mean, I think
hard to believe he's you know, he was settling into his 8th year in the Emirates with his family, living, you know, a privileged existence out there since the murder of Noel Duck Egg Kirwan. And you'd have to think, despite all the chitter chatter and the Crime World podcasts and everything, that you'd got away with it. And despite the fact that this warrant was in existence, nobody had moved on that.
No.
Why was that? There's two narratives there. A narrative coming from what we'll call the underworld is that McGovern, along with Daniel Kinahan, have protection in the United Arab Emirates. That Kinahan has significant friendships with significant and powerful people. It's hard to think that isn't the case.
Yeah.
And you can see the sort of people that he's been hanging around with, what he was able to do with his boxing career and all the rest of it, and what he was bringing really to that part of the world through sport. There's definitely truth to that narrative. And when you see how long McGovern was allowed live free, despite the fact he was wanted for murder in this country, it's hard to understand that paperwork held it up that long. Nonetheless, the more sort of official narrative is that it is a very difficult process to disentangle the bureaucratic tape of the United Arab Emirates, and that there has been significant problems with getting the correct paperwork, that there has been a huge political will from here to make those friendships and to try and break through those, those bureaucratic tape, that Drew Harris has travelled out to the United Arab Emirates and that he has worked alongside Dubai police. He's posed for a video made by them, and that there has been significant work done by the Department of Justice here antagonising this arrest of McGovern. It is one way or another. There's probably truth in both those narratives, I think. Which is usually the case.
Look, we don't understand how Dubai operates. I mean, I think even the Irish state and the people who work there, it must there is an element of mystery about who makes decisions and how they are made within a government like that, which is effectively like a monarchy. You don't get to like do freedom of information requests in Dubai. It's just a different world. But I think part of what has been going on is that Dubai have made a concerted effort to clean up their image. They certainly seem to welcome criminal figures, also, political dissidents from Eastern Europe, various other people of bad character, let's put it that way, at some point. And in recent years, they
seem to be welcoming of dirty money, let's be frank about it.
Well, they certainly seem to be slightly less welcoming of dirty money now. I think they are attempting to clean up their image. Whether they're attempting to genuinely stop the flow of dirty money is absolutely another matter. But there certainly was a time that Dubai didn't care where your money came from. That was just the way it was. But as time has gone on, they have started to extradite quite a lot of people involved in organised crime in particular, maybe a bit less so sort of dodgy businessmen. And they have, and you can see it in their public utterances, how they constantly are saying this now. They're constantly having their officials come out and make statements about how money laundering is, they're not going to allow money laundering. Yeah. And I think the Kinahans, and no thanks to you, they've become one of the really high-profile examples of organised criminals that are allowed to live in Dubai, and it's constantly being thrown at the officials there, not just by the Irish media, which they could probably shrug off, but now almost without exception, anything that is written about Dubai and money laundering, Daniel and his family get a little mention, and that I think is also a factor.
I don't think we can ignore here the fact that we've a general election about to be announced, okay? And this is a coup for the Gardaí and for the government to finally get one of the significant players in the Kinahans home. We're going to talk in a minute about what this means for Daniel and others that are sanctioned. But this is a massive big story. It's a massive big story in organised crime. I've had calls from across the world today in relation to this. This is a very significant thing that is beginning to happen. And as I say, he could be back in 24 hours or we could have a protracted fight against this extradition. But nonetheless, he's been lifted and he's in custody on the way home. So, there is that sort of idea of the law and order party, and this looks good for them. And there's also, on the kind of wider stage, the problem the United Arab Emirates and I suppose their neighbours in Saudi Arabia have with Iran and with everything that is happening is Israel, and maybe with the help of America, going to strike on Iran's oil bases. It is all they have left to keep the company afloat because of the heavy sanctions on them. There is worry, within those regions that Iran might attack Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Oil supplies, and that the whole world economy is going to be turned on its head with this. Have the United Arab Emirates got a bigger problem now than the likes of these pests who are living there amongst them, who they are, do the United Arab Emirates need friends in the West, in the States and in everywhere else? And do they need to politically show a willingness to be more conforming to that society than the other?
Yeah, look, I think there's a definite move to separate themselves from the Iranian axis of power in that part of the world. Saudi Arabia have, ahead of what happened in Gaza, there was very advanced discussions going on, allegedly with Israel. Donald Trump in particular had an effort to sort of separate Iran from the Saudi Arabian power centre and from Dubai. So, but look, who knows? I mean, does geopolitics play a role?
Of course it does. And all these things, we talk about the rise of the Kinahan organisation, and there's, they didn't just rise because they were really good at what they did. There was other factors there. There was economic factors, there's geographic factors, there was things happening in Colombia politically and militaristically that all fed into it becoming this sort of perfect rise to power for them. And will the perfect collapse also be seen as something that feeds into all these other political and, global things that are happening? And probably, yes, it will.
Yes, I think it does. I mean,
at the end of the day, the Kinahans aren't from there. They aren't one of them in the United Arab Emirates. They are there because of their money.
Yeah.
And that is going to run out.
Yeah.
And McGovern's on his way back. He's the simplest one to remove. Next up is Daniel Kinahan. The file is with the DPP.
Look,
I don't know whether that decision has been made. It possibly has. And there's paperwork in play for Daniel Kinahan. His option, along with the option for his father, for his brother, and for the others that are sanctioned, because the Emirates aren't going to hang on to Bernard Clancy and the likes of...
Well, Bernard Clancy's not going to have a load of money. The Ian Dixon.
Ian Dixon, I can't even remember his bloody name. So they're not going to hang on to them and their families and allow them live on there, sanctioned by the US and toxic, essentially. They're all going to get thrown out one way or another. Whether there's going to be a simple route back to a courtroom or they're going to have to flee. They've very few places left to go, and they're becoming increasingly less welcoming.
Yeah.
Russia, North Korea, or Iran.
Yeah.
Choose which one you'd like to be in.
Probably Russia. Probably Russia, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I mean, exactly. So there is another axis is emerging with Iran and Russia. I mean, this is a geopolitical thing. But yeah, they don't have the options that they once did. I mean, you can hear as well, like, we know obviously Sean McGovern has been arrested in connection with murder. But due to another court case involving a guy called Michael McCrotty, who was ultimately convicted of a facilitation charge in relation to the murder of Noel Duck Egg Kirwan, we know exactly what McGovern is. We don't know the exact details, but we know some of the details of what the state's case against him is going to be. And as a result of knowing what it is against McGovern, we also know what it is about in relation to Daniel. We had evidence during that case from Detective Superintendent David Gallagher, and David Gallagher also gave evidence during the Regency trial about the existence of the Hutch organised crime group. And he describes in quite good detail what the state's case against the Kinahan Cartel leaders are going to be. It says that he spoke about his own experience in prosecuting people involved in the feud and in the Kinahan organisation. And he says that in court, he said, the core function of the Kinahan group is driven by monetary gain, with drug trafficking as the primary source of income. They are involved at an international level to import drugs and in distribution at street level. They enforce their control by violence, using firearms and murder. And they also engage in money laundering to launder the proceeds of the crime. And he says the organisation is complex and well organised. And then really, I think importantly, he says some of the knowledge comes from phone calls, audio recordings, the seizure of mobile phones and other electronic devices on encrypted platforms, and from information from international policing partners, including law agencies in South America and Dubai, that have provided me with meaningful insight into the organisation. So there is all of that evidence, and that is what's coming at them. As part of that, he describes Sean McGovern is connected to the Kinahan Cartel, and he is a significant figure within the organisation in a leadership role and currently based in Dubai.
I'll tell you a story about Sean McGovern before we finish up for the moment. Many years ago, before the Regency, I used to get a lot of calls from people from the Crumlin area, parents, mums who were dropping their kids up to football and various things like that. And they were just so horrified by the Byrne organisation and how they were behaving and acting and flashing their wealth. And the kids were kind of like knocking around, I suppose, with the younger kids of these people, and they were kind of coming home wondering why they couldn't have these expensive runners and why they couldn't. And what do you say?
Yeah.
Because it didn't look as if the state was doing anything.
Yeah.
And obviously, and a lot of the time when people come to the journalists, it's their last port of call. They've tried everything else. And of course, they were afraid of being identified and they wanted to be anonymous. So we were what could go out and highlight this, I suppose. So we were sort of doing a lot of stuff around the Byrne organisation, around their rise to prominence, around their links to the Kinahan organisation, and around the wealth they were showing. So I was spending quite a bit of time in the surveillance cars we were using up around, because there was no podcast then.
No.
And I suppose to highlight a story, you ultimately needed the photographs.
100%.
So we knew they were driving around in various cars that were really unusual and very, high spec and very expensive. And, as part of our ability to highlight their spend, we needed to catch them in these cars, show them in these cars. I think we flew a plane actually over Raleigh Square to show the extensions on the backs of the houses and all this. But a particular day we were up in Crumlin, and Jaws Byrne and Liam Byrne were driving a very high-spec Lexus Jeep, and we were hoping to try and get a photograph of them. And as it happened, we were in the vicinity. They had been stopped by a police car, a sort of a regular spot check, and maybe their insurance or something, they were being checked. So this was a good opportunity for us to get a photograph of them on the street by this car, and maybe being spoken to by the police. So that was on a bridge, pulled up, and I was driving. The photographer was in the back, in the rear of it, and this scene happened. We got some photographs and they went on.
Yeah.
And we were sort of sat there on the side of the road, going through the photographs, quite happy with ourselves that we'd got this far. And I looked down and I could see it was either an Audi or a BMW. It was silver. And it was coming towards us at breakneck speed. And driving it was Sean McGovern. And in the passenger seat, hanging out the window, was the late David Byrne.
Right.
And they'd obviously known we'd been in the area. They'd known we'd got this photograph, which was enough to irritate them, I'd say. And they were coming at us. And how long does it take for these things to happen? A few seconds?
It seems both longer and shorter when it's happening.
Probably about 2 seconds.
Yeah.
But I mean, I could see their faces. They weren't far away from me. And I remember because I had the seatbelt on. And I remember just going, okay, and trying to undo the seatbelt. Of course, the middle of the Jeep was huge. You couldn't climb over. I didn't have time to do that. But I thought I'd throw myself across the middle of it.
Right.
And that way, the logic in my head was they were only going to break my legs.
Right, jeez. Yeah.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
And that was my acceptance, was that if I do this, they'll only break my legs. To my shame, I never spoke to the photographer in the back.
Give him the heads up.
To give him the heads up they were coming out. I was aware that he was on this side of me, but that was it. That was just the whole process. And last minute they just swerved and went off down the road, roaring, laughing. And I thought, wow, that was what they are capable of at that stage.
Yeah, and they absolutely were.
And that was in broad daylight on the main road.
Yeah. I mean, Sean McGovern was not one of the guys going around steroided up with loads of tattoos, but the fullness of time will prove he was far more dangerous than...
For sure. And I mean, that was their warning to us, get out of this is our area.
Yeah.
And we'll do what we want.
Yeah.
But anyway, I suppose it turns for everyone, doesn't it? And
it does turn, and you can see what their case is going to be. And look, it'll be a big day to see him standing in the dock. It's a long time coming. And there's been a lot of...
And indeed, while we're talking about it, for the Kirwan family.
Yeah, for the Kirwan family, who've spoken, I think, again, with great dignity. And Noel Duck Egg really was not somebody who deserved to die. Not that anybody does, but certainly he was, another soft target for a murderous gang.
For sure. Okay, well, that's big news today, and no doubt we'll be coming back to this over the next few days.
Thanks, Nicola.
Thanks, Niall.